So far, we have been modeling and meshing the tower and its surroundings. Now, instead, we'll texturize the tower, so we'll give a dress to the tower and all the model, so as to make it a little more realistic. And then we'll finish with the last phase, which involves exporting the completed model. First of all, it is good to make a premise regarding the downloading of the textures. Specifically, I used 3 different types of websites. The first is Ambient CG, then Texture.com, and finally Polyheaven. All 3 websites also contain a library of 3D models available for export in FBX format or HDRI. There are spherical images that could be used as background when the model is rendered. In fact, I made use of all 3 of these sites in order to download the textures most suitable for the 3D model, and then I create a folder in the same folder where I save the project realized in Blender. I renamed the individual folders containing the textures subdivided into the single elements of the 3D model in completely random order. I collect everything inside the materials folder. This step is important because it helps to create the exact path from which Blender uploads the images during the creation of the materials. You must therefore be careful not to replace, rename or delete the folder in which each images are contained. So, if I want to start a search on one of these sites that I mentioned above and then to explore the individual assets, I could either explore them without any filter or I could search directly for the image I need. For example, if I want to search for stone and I start a search, obviously all types of stone come up, from marble to gravel and rock. The more is precise the keyword in the search, the more specific and appropriate the search output will be. If I only need to type rock, obviously the search solution will be textures of rocky and rough stone. Same procedure for the other 2 sites. For example, in textures.com there is a library of 3D models and a series of photos that can be used as textures to be applied in a material. In Polyheaven 2, the path to follow is the same. Click on Browse Textures, and you have the option of doing either a general search or a category-based search. Brick, wall, wood, which includes various types from beams to parquet and so on. Once I've done this, to shorten the time, I have already done these steps in advance and I placed the downloaded texture in the materials folder, which is placed in the folder with the Blender project. Also, it is important to know that when you click on a texture, you can download it on low or high resolution, 1K, 2K, 4K, and so on. Also, this means that I have the license to use and resell my model on any platform. After downloading the texture, the folder shows a list of images. But as we will see later, there are all images that will be integrated with each other in different nodes that make up a new material. There are two possibilities for integrating them, and we will use the faster way thanks to a particular add-on. The real image is the color, but for a greater and more realistic rendering, it needs to be associated with other textures, which are the displacement, the normal. In particular, the normal is used to represent how light is reflected from that particular image. And this is very important because we can then manage and modify the parameters of the normal to make the texture we have inserted more or less realistic. Roughness is also important because it identifies how rough the surface of an element is. So, normal, roughness, displacement and color are the images that, taken individually, do not proceed your material, but if they are combined together, they produce a realistic result. Let's go back to Blender. I try to organize Blender's viewing windows. The cursor turns into an X that you see in the top left-hand corner, and holding down the left mouse button, I drag the cursor to the right until a new window appears. I open the drop-down menu at the top and I select UV Editor, which is the editor that will manage the positioning of textures on the model. In the window at the bottom, I uncheck the timeline from the drop-down menu, which is useful for animation that we do not need in this moment, and I can select a shader editor. In this way, I have 3 windows, which I have arranged in this way for convenience. I could also have opened the shader editor from right to left. However, this is the organization I consider the most optimal in order to have a cleaner and a more comprehensible working area. The shader editor is used to create and join nodes together. Nodes are individual elements that need to be connected to each other in order to generate a complete material. Before continuing, let us add a further add-on that will be useful for texturing. From Edit, Preferences, we have the possibility of modifying and customizing the add-ons available in Blender, activating them according to my preferences. In this case, I am going to look for the node add-on Wrangler, which I have already activated previously for convenience. By clicking here, we also have the possibility of having the documentation on the internet explaining the various functionalities of Node Wrangler. This is valid for any Blender add-on for which we can get the corresponding documentation in order to better understand how to use it. Let's return to Blender. This add-on will help us to connect the nodes that will make up the individual materials in a much faster and more intuitive way. Once this is done, we can temporarily hide the collection containing the environment we don't need to focus instead on texturing the tower. We also switch off the collection of furniture.